It was 2022. I was living in the Bay Area at the time, Oakland specifically, and that weekend I'd driven up to see my parents in Eureka. If you've never taken Highway 101 along the Northern California coast, it's one of those drives that feels unreal during the day and like a completely different place at night. Long empty stretches, no headlights, no signal, barely any lights at all. It gets quiet in a way that doesn't feel normal, more like something's just off. I left my parents' place around 8 p.m. on a Sunday, which, looking back, was a terrible call. I should have just stayed the night and headed back Monday morning, but I had an early shift and figured I'd just get the drive over with. Yeah, bad decision. The first couple of hours were fine. Nothing unusual. Once you get north of the bay, most of 101 turns into this narrow 2-lane road that cuts through miles of nothing. No traffic, no distractions, just you and the road. It was somewhere around Trinidad when the fog started creeping in. Now, fog out there isn't rare, but this wasn't normal. Within 5 minutes, it went from clear to almost completely white. I'm talking barely being able to see 20 feet in front of the car, probably worse than that. I slowed down to about 35, gripping the wheel a little tighter, trying to stay centered. The smart thing would have been to pull over and wait it out, but there aren't many safe spots along that stretch. And honestly, I just wanted to get home. I figured if I stayed careful, I'd be fine. But thick fog like that messes with you. Anyone who's driven through it knows what I mean. It completely throws off your sense of distance. You lose all reference points. No landmarks, no horizon, nothing to judge how far you've gone or what's coming next. It's disorienting in a way that starts to get in your head, especially when you're already tired. After maybe another half hour of driving like that, I noticed something up ahead on the shoulder. At first, it didn't even register as a person, just a shape in the fog maybe 50 feet out. But as I got closer, it became clearer. It was someone standing there. A guy based on his height and build. He wasn't walking, wasn't trying to flag me down, wasn't even looking around like he needed help. He was just standing there, facing the road. I slowed down a little more as I passed him, mostly because I didn't want him stepping out into my lane. But he didn't move, not even slightly. He didn't turn his head, didn't react to my car, nothing. It was like I wasn't even there. I got a decent look at his face as I went by, and nothing about it stood out. No obvious injuries, no expression that made sense of why he'd be out there. My first thought was maybe his car had broken down somewhere and he was waiting for someone, which would have made sense. Except I hadn't passed a single car on the shoulder. Not one. And there was nothing around him. No driveway, no side road. Nothing that explained why he'd be standing in that exact spot, facing that exact direction. I thought about turning around just to ask if he needed help, but something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't fear exactly, just this quiet feeling that I shouldn't. So I kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I saw him again. Same guy. No question. Same height, same dark clothes, same exact posture, standing perfectly still on the shoulder. The only difference this time was he was on the left side of the road instead of the right. Everything else was identical. I actually said, "What the hell?" out loud because there was no way that made sense. I was the only car out there. No intersections, no side roads, nowhere he could have gone to get ahead of me. The only logical explanation was that it was a different person who just happened to look exactly like him, standing in the exact same way, which didn't feel logical at all. I didn't want to look at him as I passed, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know. And when I got close enough to see his face again, I knew it was him. This time, though, he moved. Right as I passed, his head snapped toward me and he locked eyes with me through the window. I felt it instantly, like I shouldn't have looked. I broke eye contact as fast as I could, but it was already too late. Something about the way he turned, the timing of it, it didn't feel normal. It felt intentional. I pressed the gas a little, not enough to lose control in the fog, but enough to put some distance between me and whatever that was. I think I hit around 45 for a bit before easing off again because the fog just kept getting thicker. At that point, I could barely even see the center line anymore. And that's when I started having trouble thinking straight. At first, I told myself it was just the fatigue, the stress of driving in those conditions, and yeah, probably a little bit of panic from what I'd just seen. But the more I drove, the more it felt like something else was creeping in too, something I couldn't really explain. I kept trying to make sense of it, running through every logical explanation I could come up with, but none of it really stuck. My thoughts kept looping like my brain was trying to force something normal out of something that clearly wasn't. Then, maybe 3 minutes later, my headlights caught something ahead of me again. Another person. This time, though, he wasn't on the shoulder. He was standing directly in the middle of the road. I didn't have a choice, I had to stop. So I did, easing on the brakes until the car came to a complete halt a few feet away from him. My heart was already racing at that point, but seeing someone just standing there like that, completely blocking the road, it pushed it to another level. He had his hood up this time, pulled low enough that I couldn't see his face at all. But even without seeing it, I knew. I don't know how to explain that, but I was almost certain it was the same guy. And just like before, he didn't move. Not even a little. We just sat there, my car idling, headlights fixed on him, and even though I couldn't see his eyes, I could feel it, that he was looking straight at me. The kind of feeling that makes your chest tighten for no reason. I didn't know what to do. I flashed my high beams a few times, hoping he'd react, step aside, do anything to show he was a normal person. Nothing. No movement. No reaction. Just standing there. At that point, I decided I needed to get out of there. I shifted the car into reverse, planning to back up and maybe turn around somewhere behind me. But the second I looked into my rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. There was someone behind me. A figure coming out of the fog, slowly walking toward my car. I actually yelled, "Holy shit!" out loud without even thinking and slammed the car back into drive. I was trapped. One person in front, one behind, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't just weird anymore. This felt like an actual threat. I jerked the wheel hard to the right, crossing into the opposite lane to go around the guy blocking the road. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch as I swerved past him, which somehow made it worse. For a split second I thought I was clear. Then something slammed into the back of my car. Not a tap. Not a bump. It was violent. The entire rear of the car kicked to the side and I heard this horrible crunch. Metal grinding against something hard. It was loud enough that it echoed inside the car. My hands tightened on the wheel, but somehow I kept control and just kept going, adrenaline taking over completely. My first thought was that another car had hit me from behind. It had to be. There was no other explanation for that kind of impact. But when I checked my mirrors, there was nothing. No headlights, no car, no people, nothing at all. Even the figure that had been behind me, gone. That's when it really hit me how wrong the whole situation was. It didn't make any sense anymore. None of it did. I didn't slow down after that. I just kept driving, pushing the speed as much as I safely could with the fog still suffocating the road. I didn't care about anything except getting out of that area. Eventually, I hit the 101 interchange and just like that, the fog started to clear. Visibility came back and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could actually see the road properly. And slowly my mind started to settle. Once the immediate fear wore off, logic started creeping back in. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. I'd been driving for almost 4 hours at that point. I was exhausted. I'd been staring into dense fog for who knows how long, completely isolated, with nothing but darkness around me. So I told myself I hallucinated it. All of it. As crazy as it sounded, it actually made more sense than anything else. Fatigue, stress, low visibility, it lined up. The figures, the feeling of being watched, even the impact, maybe my brain had just created something extremely vivid. Why it was so specific, I had no idea, but I didn't have a better explanation. By the time I got home, I was drained. I just wanted to sleep and forget the entire thing ever happened. But then I walked around to the back of my car. And I just stood there. The rear bumper was completely wrecked. There was a massive dent stretched across almost the entire width, deep enough that there was no way I could have imagined it. Whatever hit me had hit hard, way harder than I realized in the moment. Which meant one thing. I hadn't imagined it. I just stared at it for a solid 5 minutes, trying to process what I was looking at. There wasn't any paint transfer either, which made no sense. If another car had hit me, there should have been something, scratches, color, anything. But there was nothing like that. Just the dent. So if it wasn't another car, then what the hell was it? I did end up calling the police, mostly just to report what I'd seen, even though I knew how it sounded. Nothing ever came from it. No reports, no follow-up, nothing that explained any of it. And over the past 4 years, I've gone back and forth on that night more times than I can count. I've tried to break it down, piece by piece, come up with anything that makes sense. The explanation I've settled on, the one that feels the most reasonable, is that I hallucinated the figures, and in the panic of trying to get away, I must have hit something real. A guardrail post, a mile marker, something solid enough to do that kind of damage. But there's one part one can't shake. I can accept hallucinating one thing, but hallucinating people, while at the exact same time actually experiencing a real physical crash? That part doesn't sit right with me. And the fact that there was real damage to my car has always made me feel like maybe there was something else out there that night. Something that wasn't just in my head. This next part happened way more recently. Like just a few weeks ago during spring break. I'm still in college, senior year now, and I went back to my hometown like I usually do. The problem is there's absolutely nothing to do there. It's one of those suburban places that's technically near a city, but doesn't have any of the benefits of actually being in one. No nightlife, no bars, nothing within walking distance. When I'm at school, I've always got something going on. Back home though, it's basically a ghost town. The other issue was my timing didn't line up with anyone else's. I've got maybe 4 or 5 friends from high school I still talk to, and every single one of them was either still in classes or had already taken their spring break earlier in March. So I was basically staring down a full week of doing absolutely nothing, which I wasn't exactly excited about. I'd also been trying to cut back on some habits, nicotine and alcohol mainly, and I knew sitting around bored all week was either going to make that worse, or give me a chance to actually reset. So I decided I'd stay busy. I told myself I was going to work out every day, lift in the mornings, go for a run in the afternoons, just keep my mind occupied so I didn't get stuck in my own head. That's how I ended up going for a run that Tuesday afternoon. There's this loop I used to run all the time back in high school when I did cross country. It's exactly 3 miles, start to finish, beginning and ending at my house. The route goes through my neighborhood for about a quarter mile, then cuts into this wooded trail that winds through a small patch of forest before bringing you back out onto the street maybe a block from home. I've probably run it hundreds of times, easily. I know every turn, every slight incline, every part of that trail. And honestly, the woods were always my favorite part. Running on pavement messes with your knees, but that trail is soft, quiet, isolated in a good way. It's the kind of place where your mind just clears out. I headed out around 5 p.m. The sun still had a couple hours before it set, so visibility shouldn't have been an issue. But the second I stepped outside, I noticed the fog. It was off. I don't really know how else to describe it. I've lived in that town my whole life and I've never seen fog like that before. It wasn't just light haze, it was thick in a way that didn't feel natural. Almost artificial. Like everything past 30 or 40 feet just faded out of existence. It honestly looked like something out of a lo-fi video or a game environment where the background just dissolves into gray. I stood there for a second thinking about skipping the run altogether. But I talked myself out of it. The trail is simple, just one path, no forks, no alternate routes. I've been through it so many times I could probably run it blindfolded. There was no real way to get lost unless I went completely off trail, which I obviously wasn't going to do. I had my Garmin watch on to track distance and pace, so I started the run. Got through the neighborhood portion, then entered the woods. And the second I stepped in there, the fog got even worse. It made sense. The trees blocked out what little light was left, but it dropped visibility down to maybe 15 or 20 feet at most. Still, the path itself was clear enough to follow, so I kept going. For the first mile and a half, everything felt normal. I was running a little slower than usual because of the conditions, but nothing felt wrong. I remember checking my watch at the 1 mile mark, then again at 1.5. The problem started around 2.5 miles in. At that point in the loop, I should have been near the end of the trail. There's a specific section where the path curves left, then goes slightly uphill, and right after that you come out onto the pavement. I know that part better than anything. I've run it so many times it's basically muscle memory. But when I looked down at my watch and saw 2.5 miles, I was still deep in the woods. At first, I didn't think too much of it. My watch was old, at least 4 years at that point, so I figured the GPS was just glitching out. Between the dense tree cover and the fog, it made sense that the signal might be off. That explanation felt reasonable enough, so I just kept running, assuming I wasn't as far along as I thought. Then I passed 3 miles. And that's when I knew something wasn't right. 3 miles is the entire loop. At that point, I should have been back home, or at least stepping out onto the street. Instead, I was still surrounded by trees. Same dirt path. Same thick fog. No sign of an exit, no change in terrain. Nothing. So I stopped. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions. I'm not superstitious and I don't get paranoid easily. There had to be a logical explanation. I stood there catching my breath, trying to think it through, but nothing made sense. There's only one trail in those woods. I know that for a fact. No forks, no side paths, nothing. The only way I could have gotten lost is if I'd gone off the trail completely and pushed through the brush, which I hadn't. I looked down at my watch again. 3.1 miles. And the number kept going up, even though I was standing completely still. That's when I realized the GPS was definitely messed up. That part at least made sense. I didn't really have a choice at that point. Either I kept running forward and hoped I'd eventually hit the end of the trail, or I turned around and retraced my steps. Turning back felt like the smarter move. If I just followed the same path in reverse, I'd eventually reach the trailhead where I started, and from there, getting home would be easy. So that's what I did. I turned around and started running back the way I came. Almost immediately, I noticed the fog had gotten worse. I don't even know how that was possible, but it had. What little visibility I had before was basically gone now. I had to slow down just to make sure I stayed on the trail and didn't accidentally veer off into the trees. Every step felt more uncertain than the last, like I was running through something that didn't want me to see where I was going. After about a mile of running, so I was around 4 miles total at that point, I heard something, and it stopped me cold for a split second. Like I said earlier, those woods are usually dead silent, probably because they're too small to support much wildlife. So hearing anything out there immediately felt wrong. But it wasn't just the fact that I heard something. It was what I heard. I've tried to describe it 100 different ways and none of them really capture it. The closest thing I can compare it to is a moan, but even that's not right. It was deeper than that, lower. More like a sustained drone that kept shifting in pitch. It would rise, then dip, then rise again, over and over like some kind of distorted siren. But it sounded human. That's the part that made it unbearable. Not human like someone calling for help. Not even like someone in pain. It didn't carry any kind of emotion or intent. It was just this constant, wavering sound that didn't seem to serve any purpose at all. And it was coming from behind me. I started running faster. But by that point, I'd already been running over 4 miles. My body was starting to give out, and no matter how much I pushed myself, there was a limit to how fast I could go. The more I tried to speed up, the more exhausted I got, and the more exhausted I got, the more terrified I became. Because the sound didn't stop. It didn't fade. It didn't get quieter. It stayed right there, behind me, matching me. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, and I did more times than I can count, there was nothing there. Just fog. Thick, empty fog swallowing everything behind me. But the sound was still there, like it was attached to me somehow. I ran like that for what felt like forever. No breaks. No slowing down. Just running with that noise following me the entire time. It was easily the most scared I've ever been in my life. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I broke out of the woods. I stumbled onto the street, barely able to breathe, and almost threw up from how hard I'd been pushing myself. My legs felt like they were about to give out and my chest was on fire. But I didn't care. I was out. Or at least, I thought I was. The fog was still there, just as thick as it had been in the woods. I turned around trying to catch my breath and looked back toward the trail. And that's when I saw it. Something was standing there. We launched early Saturday morning from a small put-in near Nakata. The fog was already thick when we got there, but that's pretty normal for the coast. Usually it burns off by mid-morning once the sun gets high enough, so we didn't think much of it. We had a GPS, a compass, everything we needed. The plan was simple. Paddle out toward Long Island, maybe do some bird watching, stop on a sandbar for lunch, and head back before the tide shifted in the afternoon. Nothing crazy. The first hour went exactly how you'd expect. Calm water, steady pace. The fog had that weird coastal effect where it dampens everything. You feel like you're moving through something soft, like the air itself is heavier. Sound doesn't travel the way you expect. Everything is quieter, but at the same time, certain noises carry farther than they should. We couldn't see more than maybe 40 feet in any direction, but we stayed close. Ed went off to my left, maybe 15 feet, and checked our bearing every few minutes. It felt controlled. Normal. It was probably around 9 a.m. when I heard it. A splash. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I assumed it was Edwin. Maybe he adjusted his stroke or dipped his paddle awkwardly. But when I glanced over, his paddle was just resting across his kayak. He wasn't even moving. He looked at me and asked, "Did you hear that too?" I nodded. We both stopped paddling at the same time and just let ourselves drift, sitting there in the fog, listening. And then we heard it again. But this time it was clearer. It wasn't a paddle. It was oars. There's a difference. If you've spent enough time on the water, you know it instantly. Paddles have a lighter, quicker sound. Oars are heavier, slower, more deliberate. And this was definitely someone rowing, which didn't make a lot of sense. We were in kayaks. Most people out there use kayaks. You only really hear oars from a different kind of boat, something bigger like a rowboat. And it wasn't far away either. Maybe 100 feet off to our right. Edwin said it was probably just someone else out on the bay, which was reasonable. There are other kayakers out there sometimes, and occasionally fishermen in small boats checking traps. The fog was thick enough that we wouldn't see them until they were basically on top of us. And sound over water, especially in fog, can be deceptive. Sometimes things sound closer than they are, sometimes farther. So we waited, just drifting there, expecting whoever it was to either come into view or call out. That's kind of standard when visibility is this low. You announce yourself, let other boaters know where you are so nobody runs into each other. But nothing happened. The rowing just continued. Same pace, same rhythm. No voice, no change, no acknowledgement that we were even there. I suggested maybe they didn't realize we were nearby, so Edwin called out, just a simple, "Hey," into the fog. No response. Not even a pause in the rowing. Whoever it was didn't slow down, didn't speed up, didn't react at all. It was like they either didn't hear us, or were choosing not to respond. So we started paddling again. At that point, we figured we'd either run into them eventually, or they'd pass by and that'd be the end of it. But here's where it started getting weird. Over the next 20 minutes, that rowing sound stayed with us. Exactly the same. It didn't get closer. It didn't get farther away. It just stayed there. Off to our right. Same distance. Same steady rhythm. At first, I tried to ignore it. Then I started focusing on it without meaning to. After a while, it almost became hypnotic. The consistency of it, stroke after stroke, perfectly timed, like whoever was out there could maintain the exact same motion indefinitely. And the longer it went on, the more wrong it started to feel. Edwin and I weren't really talking anymore at that point, but I could tell he felt it too. There was this unspoken tension, like we were both waiting for something to change, but nothing did. At one point, we adjusted our course slightly east, trying to angle ourselves closer to shore. And for a split second, the fog thinned. Just enough. I caught a glimpse of it. A small rowboat, sitting low in the water. And there was someone in it, at the oars. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person moving in that same steady rhythm. Then the fog closed back in. Gone. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. I asked Edwin if he saw it. He said yeah. That was enough for me. I didn't like it. I couldn't explain why, but something about the entire situation was deeply unsettling. It wasn't like we'd seen anything openly threatening, it was just a guy in a boat. But the way he refused to acknowledge us, the way he kept that exact distance, the way it felt like he was following us without ever getting closer, it didn't feel right. So I turned and started heading toward shore. I didn't even say anything at first. I just changed direction and hoped Edwin would follow. He did. The problem was, navigating in that kind of fog isn't as easy as it sounds. Even with a GPS, Willapa Bay is full of shifting sandbars, shallow channels, and mud flats that can trap you if you're not careful. We had a general idea of where we were, but general isn't the same as exact. And the last thing we wanted was to run aground somewhere, while that other boat was still out there. We started paddling southeast, picking up the pace as much as we could without burning ourselves out. And the entire time, that rowing sound stayed with us. I kept glancing over to my right, trying to catch even the slightest movement through the fog, hoping I'd see that boat again, but I never did. And then, out of nowhere, the fog started to lift. Not completely, but enough. It thinned just enough that we could suddenly see maybe 100 yards out in every direction. It felt abrupt, like a curtain being pulled back. The first thing I did was turn to my right, straight toward where the rowing sound had been coming from that entire time. There was nothing there. Just open water. No boat. No person. Nothing even remotely out of place. I checked behind us. Same thing. Empty. I scanned everywhere I could, turning in slow circles, trying to find anything that made sense of what we just experienced. I saw Edwin doing the exact same thing, and that's when it hit me. However freaked out I was, he was worse. I could see it in his face, in his eyes. He looked genuinely shaken. We kept paddling, but somehow, now that the sound had stopped and we could actually see again, it felt even worse. Because at least before, there was something we could point to, even if it didn't make sense. Now there was nothing. No explanation at all. How does a boat just disappear like that? The shoreline finally came into view about 5 minutes later, and I felt this wave of relief hit me. Solid ground. An end to whatever that was. I thought, okay, we're done. It's over. But it wasn't. We didn't even bother looking for a proper landing spot. We just paddled straight for land. The second we hit the shallows, I jumped out into knee-deep water. It was freezing, but I barely registered it. I just needed to be out of the kayak, standing on something that didn't move. For a minute or two, neither of us said anything. We just stood there on the beach, catching our breath, staring back out at the bay. The fog was still thinning, slowly pulling back, but there were still no boats anywhere. Not a single one. Nothing. At some point, Edwin started walking a little ways up the beach while I stayed back to secure my kayak. After a few seconds, he told me to come over. There was something in his voice. I walked up to him and I could tell he was looking at something on the ground. I picked up my pace to catch up, but the second I saw what he was staring at, my stomach dropped all over again. Footprints. What? Barefoot footprints. They were coming straight out of the water and onto the sand. And they were fresh. You could still see the water pooled inside the impressions, slowly soaking into the sand. Whoever made them hadn't been out of the water long at all. But that wasn't the worst part. They didn't just come up onto the beach and stop. The prints led a few steps inland toward the tree line, then turned, following along the shoreline to our left. After that, they angled back again, cutting toward the trees, and disappeared into the woods. I just stood there, tracing the path with my eyes, trying to process it. Then I started following them backward. The footprints were coming from farther down the shore. Whoever made them had walked along the water's edge, come up onto the beach right where we had landed, and then gone into the forest. Edwin was already a few steps ahead of me. He said we needed to leave. But I couldn't stop looking at the tracks. They were leading somewhere, or more accurately, they were coming from somewhere. And I needed to know where. I told Edwin I wanted to follow them, but not into the woods. The other direction. Back along the shoreline. I wanted to see where they started. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And honestly, maybe I had. But something about this whole thing had been bothering me since the moment we first heard those oars. It was like this constant pressure in the back of my head, telling me none of this was normal. And I wasn't ready to just walk away without at least trying to understand what was going on. Edwin didn't want to go. But he also didn't want to stay there alone. So after about 30 seconds of going back and forth, he gave in, reluctantly. We started walking down the shoreline, following the footprints. The fog still hadn't fully cleared, but visibility was a lot better now. We could see far enough ahead that nothing should have been able to surprise us anymore. We walked for maybe 2-3 minutes. Then I saw it. About 50 yards down the beach, pulled up onto the sand at an angle, was a small wooden rowboat. The wood was dark, almost black, and the oars were resting inside it. And I knew instantly. It was the same boat. No doubt in my mind. Same shape, same size, same look. The exact one I'd seen for those few seconds out on the water. And now it was here, on the shore, with a trail of wet footprints leading away from it. I started walking toward it without even thinking. But Edwin grabbed my arm. Art, he told me we were leaving. Not suggested, told me. He said he didn't care what was in that boat or who had been rowing it. We were done. And something about the way he said it snapped me out of it. That curiosity I felt just seconds ago, it was gone. Replaced instantly with something heavier. Fear. Because when I really thought about it, whoever had been in that boat somehow made it to shore before us. Walked all the way down the beach to the exact spot where we just happened to land. And still had enough time to disappear into the trees. We turned around and started heading back toward the kayaks. Edwin wasn't even walking at that point. He was almost running. And seeing him like that only made everything feel so much worse. We didn't waste another second. We got back to the kayaks, shoved them into the water as fast as we could, and pushed off without even saying anything. No discussion, no second thoughts, just pure instinct to get as far away from that place as possible. I don't think either of us even looked back at the shoreline once we started paddling. And that was it. At least, physically. Because mentally, that morning never really left. I've thought about it more times than I can count over the past 6 years. Every now and then it just comes back, randomly, and I end up going through the whole thing again in my head, trying to piece it together in a way that makes sense. I've considered every explanation. Best case scenario? It was some kind of elaborate prank. Someone messing with us out on the water, maybe trying to scare people in the fog. But even that doesn't really hold up. Because when I break it down step by step, it falls apart. We were out there for over 2 hours. We didn't just paddle in a straight line. We changed directions multiple times, adjusted our course, drifted, stopped, moved again. And when the fog started lifting, we made a direct line for shore. For that to have been a person in that rowboat, they would have had to reach land before us, in a slower boat. Then get out, walk all the way down the shoreline to the exact spot where we just happened to land. And then disappear into the trees. All before we even got there. There's no version of that makes sense. It's not just unlikely, it feels impossible. And that's the part that's always stuck with me. Not the sound, not even the boat itself, but the timing of it. The way everything lined up just a little too perfectly, in a way that shouldn't have been possible. I've tried to let it go. Tried to just write it off as one of those things you can't fully explain and move on from. And honestly, that's what I'm going to try to do again after this. Because the more I think about it, the less I understand it. And I'm not sure I actually want to.